Well, we're now about a month and a half away when state workers, when we're talking about teachers, doctors, nurses, firefighters, police officers, they are facing D-Day. They either have to be fully vaccinated or they will be fired from their jobs. Now, there is a religious exemption. A question that a couple of us have been asking is who gets to decide on the sincerity of one's faith? I will tell you one of the people who asked that question along with me is our friend Brandi Kruse, Q13 News, who got through a public records request several of the documents of what led up to how this decision came down from Jay Inslee and the state. And Brandi joins us here on the Dori Monson Show. Good afternoon. Good to talk to you today.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, first of all, this was hilarious because you started getting these documents last night and you started texting them to me just so I could see how on many of the pages, every single line was completely blacked out. I mean, these were pretty heavily redacted, weren't they?
They are, and it's frustrating as a journalist. And I will say, full disclosure, originally a citizen had requested this public disclosure, basically asking for any of the legal considerations that happened behind the scenes as it pertained to the vaccine mandate and exemptions. And so we took his, he had sent it to me just to make sure the documents were legit. We went and we got the documents for ourselves. And yeah, a lot of it is redacted, especially the stuff that is between the governor's office and the attorney general's office. And the claim there under state law is attorney-client privilege. So, for example, there's a 20-page document. You can see the subject line in the email is just mandating vaccines. And then there's a 20-page document attached from the attorney general's office where you can't see any of it except the letterhead.
You see, and I find that very disturbing, Brandi, because unless Jay Inslee has in some way retained the services of the attorney general, this doesn't sound at all to me like traditional attorney-client privilege. What that sounds like to me is the governor and the attorney general trying to do an end run against our state's open records laws, which are among the strongest, maybe the very strongest in the country. That bothers me tremendously.
Well, as a journalist, like I said, it is frustrating because when you also look at it as a citizen, we're paying both the attorney's salary and the client's salary, technically, the governor and the attorney general. And so, needing or wanting to know, okay, what were the legal considerations that you made behind the scenes in weighing whether you could legally carry this out and it would stand up to muster in court? And I hate to say it this way, and I'm not encouraging anyone to do anything, but really the only way we'll probably see what's behind these documents is if there is ultimately some sort of legal challenge where the state has to defend their actions in court.
Okay, but there are some things that you're able to determine as you went through these docs that a citizen requested, and that is that there were some people who didn't even want a religious exemption, right?
Yeah, so most of the documents pertaining to the religious exemption are redacted in their entirety. However, there was one early on from Kathleen Leathers, who's the general counsel for Governor Jay Inslee. So she works for the governor. She's not in the attorney general's office. And when she sent out the initial email saying, here's what we're thinking, she had a line where she was talking about possible exemptions, and I'll quote from it. She wrote, medical for sure and religious, parentheses, if we have to. She said, if yes, as narrow as possible. So it was very clear that she did not want a religious exemption, but realized you were probably going to have one. So if you did, it would have to be as narrow as possible. And then everything on this subject moving forward is redacted. Attorney-client privilege is cited. And then you saw, though, and we saw this week what the end result was, or seems to be, which is the state had basically a two-part question for people who want a religious exemption. One was, are you claiming a religious exemption? The second one was asking them to affirm that they've never had a vaccine as an adult or had any medicine prescribed from a doctor as an adult, which is obviously very, very narrow. I would argue there probably aren't many adults
ridiculous
who've never had medicine.
I have those forms in my hands because I was reading them on the show yesterday. And then there's another boilerplate one, that not from the state, but that one state agency sent out that asks you to submit it to your religious leader who would then testify as to the sincerity of your faith. And I'm thinking, since a lot of people go to these 2,000 congregation mega churches, I'm not sure exactly how that's going to play out either.
Yeah, and the state told me that particular document, we'd asked them about it, was not something the state put together. However, it is still the document that particular, it's a entity that helps with school districts in the Olympia area that they are using. And so you have to wonder, even if somebody could get that sort of documentation from their religious leader, I'd also know some people don't have a religious leader. They are religious privately on their own and don't, attend some sort of service. And then you also run into a timeline issue, which is, let's say that you submit that for a religious exemption and you're denied based on HR says we don't believe you. Then it takes basically up to 6 weeks to be fully inoculated from the point you get your first dose to you get your second, and then 2 weeks after that. And so you're really running out of time to be able to meet the state's October 18th deadline at that point.
Okay, and I know that you have talked to a lot of firefighters and nurses and police officers, because what I keep hearing from Jay Inslee and from Chris Rakedahl, who was on with me on Friday, I think you talked to him on Thursday last week, and they all say, we're confident because of the coercion, they don't use that word, but when these people get up to this deadline and face losing their career or getting a vaccine, they're going to choose the vaccine. But I don't know about you. The people who have been contacting me, and I've had dozens, maybe hundreds, they sound very dug in on their position that they are not going to get the vaccine. It's not necessarily even for religious or medical reasons vaccine. It's just because of what they perceive to be state overreach.
Yeah, and look, and I've heard from both, but I have heard it from a great number of state workers and local workers for Seattle and for King County, for instance, who say, I'm just not getting it. I'm not getting it, and I guess I'm going to lose my job. I have heard from some who say, okay, I'm not willing to lose my job. I heard from a guy who works actually for public health, who said that he's got a wife with a baby on the way and he has to do what he has to do for his family. So although wasn't ready to get the vaccine, he was going to move forward and do it anyway. One thing I want to note just on sort of two things from these documents quickly, if I could, that I think is interesting. Just days before Governor Inslee announced, got in front of cameras on August 9th and announced the vaccine mandate, 5 days before that, on August 4th, behind the scenes in emails, the governor's staff was committed to giving workers an alternative to the vaccine. They were committed to letting people who didn't want the vaccine have an alternative, and that is to submit themselves to weekly COVID testing. We've seen other states do that as well.
Sure.
But for some reason, and I don't fully know why, because you could tell that there were some Zoom meetings or some in-person meetings that happened between August 5th and August 9th where they changed their minds. And no longer were willing to offer this opt-out, which I had heard from some state workers, had they done that like California, state workers would have been fine with that if it meant keeping their job. So that was something that happened behind the scenes. And then one other thing I thought you were maybe the only person who would appreciate this, because it gets a little bit sort of into the weeds, but a guy named Eric Sanju, he's the senior assistant attorney general in the attorney general's office. At some point in his email exchanges, he kind of points out that part of this is or was intended to be about optics. He talked about, requiring healthcare workers to get the vaccine is one thing, because you want to make sure that people aren't getting sick in hospitals and that you have people dying in hospital settings or not able to go to work. But he said, and I'll read the quote for you. He said, however, for executive cabinet agency employees, the purpose really is to get vaccine numbers up and have the state lead by example. So to me, that sounded like, this was the governor saying that I want, our executive level agencies to lead by example, to be fully vaccinated. But even the senior assistant attorney general acknowledges that it wasn't really for the sole purpose of making sure that people don't get sick. It was so that if we're going to ask other people to get a vaccine or lose their jobs, then we have to do the same within our own agency as well. And I just thought that was an interesting sentence that I thought you might appreciate.
Well, I do, because I've been skeptical, and like you, I'm not against the vaccine anyway. I am vaccinated. I believe the vaccination sounds like a good idea for most people who choose to get it. I'm against the mandate. But that is interesting to me, because I think so much of what we've been doing, from putting masks on kids to, now Oregon's making people wear masks outside, so many things that are being done are clearly not for any reasonable public health reason. And that makes me wonder what ulterior motives are at play. And I always follow the money, Brandi, and we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars. And if they make these boosters mandatory for years and years to come, we're talking about trillions of dollars to an industry, the pharmaceutical industry, that 2 years ago was one of the most hated, distrusted industries in the country and got, Americans hooked on opioids and all of that. And now all of a sudden people just take at their word that they're doing everything for purity of motive. And that's something I've always doubted. I don't think that's a reason not to get the vaccine, but I sure think it's a reason we should be eyes wide open as we go through this whole process.
Well, that's an important note. And like you, I have the vaccine. I got it as the first available opportunity. I feel fine. I'm glad I got it. In fact, I've had multiple direct exposures to people with COVID that I found out and actually did not get COVID. And so I'm very grateful for that. But, when we do these stories and these deep dives into what the state's doing with the vaccine mandate and the religious mandate or the religious exemption and all this, it's not making an opinion or taking a stance on the issue of vaccines. And I tweeted this earlier. It is quite literally the baseline, bottom of the barrel duty of the media to question what government does. It doesn't matter if it's a Democrat or a Republican, they have such immense power. And so the ability to go behind the scenes, and this is what your show does so well, and to question every little thing. And what's the legality of that? What is the legal rationale? Can this stand up in court? It's important. And we're the ones with the power to be able to do that. And I will also note, Dori, not that you need any compliments, but, I don't do stories this sort of involved often. I do a lot of, political stories. I mean, occasionally we'll do some deep dives into documents like this, but this sort of stuff, the watchdog reporting that you're committed to, people need to know that is the hardest, most time-intensive reporting that there is. And it is the most important reporting that there is. And you get a lot of flack for it and all that, but I can't overstate how important it is to Well,
I agree, and I'll toss that right back to you because you said that to Jenny Durkin's face, or as a Zoom call a couple of weeks ago when you said, I'm not here to rubber stamp what you say. I'm here to question and to get answers, and I know that you are fantastic at that as well. So, all right. Mutual Admiration Society's over. You're also doing some good things with what's happening in Afghanistan right now.
Yeah, we have a donation drive we're doing at Q13 Fox that goes through Friday, and it's sort of in partnership with World Relief Seattle, and what they do is they help refugees that are resettling. I'm sure you share my feelings that the images out of Afghanistan and what has happened to our allies, people who worked with our military, and even Americans who are left there has been horrifying. And I've talked to a lot of members of the military who had interpreters who were stuck there, who were just devastated, trying desperately to sort of help them and their families and young kids. So what we're doing is we're collecting new household necessities. These are things like dishes, towels, bedding. We have multiple drop-off locations across Western Washington. Also through today, you can find an Amazon wish list on our website. Go to q13fox.com/Washington Welcome. And all the information you need to help us out is right there. So I appreciate you allowing me to mention it.
Got it. All right. q13fox.com/Washington Welcome. All right, Brandi, great work on this as always, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks for having me on.
Okay, thank you. Brandi Kruse, Q13 Fox News. And I'd love to hear what you think about all this. You can text me at 98973, and we do have lots more straight ahead here on the Dori Monson Show.